Welcome to the Social Mission Revolution.
Each week we explore some of the greatest undertold stories of businesses and everyday people who are making their ultimate impact on the world through social mission. This is Social Mission Revolution,
And this is your host, Andrea Putting. Welcome to the Social Mission Revolution. And my guest today is Shannon Hurley. Now, I recently heard Shannon speak, and I was really wanted to get her onto the show so that we can listen to a different kind of story, a different kind of social mission. And I think we're going to be fascinated by the story that she has to share with us. So welcome, Shannon.
Morning, Andrea. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I'm going to leave a bit of intrigue and we'll uncover what your story is about. But first of all, let me start with the one question that I ask everybody. What if there was just one thing for you to fight for, what would that be?
I love this question. And this is hard for me to answer because there are so many things worth fighting for. But when I think about back to the mission that I'm on and fighting for and what means the most to me, it's actually that we value and listen to nature and realize that, like our life can't survive without it, and the importance of acting as guardians for our planet, because this is a planet that we're all on this journey together with lots of other life. And my particular passion happens to be sharks and ocean conservation, and which you'll definitely hear more about as we go on through the show. But that is my particular passion, and realizing that the importance that sharks play on this planet, and they're not just man-eating creatures, they actually deserve to be here as much as as much as people. And so for me, that is a cause well worth fighting for, that we recognize the importance of other life on this planet and we work to protect it in any way that we see fit and that suits our lives and our missions.
It is important, and the most important thing is nature. And at the moment, we're having a bit of a resurgence in giving nature a chance to recover in the world. So it's a whole chain. If we don't have one thing, if one thing's removed, everything else falls apart. I do have a biology background, by the way, so I know that part of nature is very, very important. So Shannon, you've just said that your passion is about sharks, but how did you get into being passionate about sharks?
So I wasn't always passionate about sharks. As a kid, we would go on family trips away to the beach and spend time swimming in the ocean, and that was probably where I guess my love of animals really sort of came from. And I wanted to become a vet when I was younger, like many young teenage girls.
Like me.
And I sort of followed that. Yes. And I followed that journey into high school and then into my university when I studied animal science. And then sort of something hit me. I was like, you know what, actually, being a vet doesn't really appeal to me anymore. And so I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. And so I just thought, well, look, I knew I loved animals and I loved the environment. So let's just stick with it and see what happens. And then it was in my last year of university where I studied some marine biology subjects. And I realized right then and there that I loved everything about the marine world. And I was just fascinated. And then I got my scuba diving license and I learnt to swim with the underwater world and see the immense beauty that this different world had. And then I was hooked, you could say. And I wanted to get in the water as much as possible. I learnt to become a scuba diving instructor and teach people how to dive. And about probably a couple of years after I learned to scuba dive, I took my first trip to the Great Barrier Reef. And I knew on this trip that I would be getting knowingly in the water with sharks. And in actual fact, on a shark feeding dive, when they were knowingly going to be bringing fish heads into the water right in front of our eyes with sharks swimming all around us. And family and friends back home thought I was crazy. And maybe I did as well. I was thinking, what the hell am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
But then, and you know, because you hear all these stories about sharks, right? And in the media, we see, you know, these stories about, you know, how they're all out just to get humans, and there's been another shark attack here and there. But then as soon as I got in the water with sharks, everything changed for me, because I first saw that sharks, for me, weren't what they were made out to be in the media. And I remember sitting in about 20 meters below the surface of the water with scuba diving equipment on. There was a whole line of us lined up waiting for these sharks to come out and, you know, and be attracted to the fish head that they were putting in the water. And there were sharks swimming all around us, in front of us, above us, behind us. And I was in total awe, because I was still here, and I had this amazing experience seeing these sharks in real life. And this was the first time that what we see in the media and what my experiences of sharks were really didn't match up. And that was my first time that I realized that, hang on, there's a different story than what we're told here. And on that same trip, I had 3 different encounters with sharks. The second one was what I like to call the puppy dogs of the sea, otherwise known as nurse sharks. And they were like, one night they were playing on the surface of the water, and they swam up to the back of our boat, and they like came on and looked to be sucking on the back of it and like playing on the surface of the water as if they were kind of like children, just like playing around. And for me, that was the first time I actually saw friendly sharks in real life as well. And then I definitely thought, wow, okay, sharks are not what we often see. And that really began my journey of just seeing how fascinating sharks could be and how they all have individual personalities. And I wanted to get to know them, and I wanted to be their friends.
You want to be the friends to sharks? Why not? It doesn't appeal at all to me, but I'm just so fascinated with this, of the idea that they are something different to what everyone has perceived them to be, that they're not. So I'm just really intrigued with learning more about sharks because of what I've heard you talk about, that, and to see them in a new light.
Yeah, and I think that sharks too I think I've really always had a love for, you know, the things that are sort of unknown and mysterious, you know, and you know, like many other animals too. And so for me, I just became curious, and there's something more to in that fear. Like, you know, many of us grew up watching Jaws, and, you know, having that fear instilled in us, right? And so for me, like, there's even a step further. It's more about being curious too, about those things that often scare us and we know is scary. And there's definitely more, like, even when you meet someone, right, and maybe you don't often really connect with them, but of course there's something more to that person than, you know, what suddenly meets the eye. And for me, it's become important to not judge everything by what we see, and just be curious about the fear and about something else.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to live our lives, is to have that curiosity and to think deeper and to really explore. And I know just from looking at my own animals, like I have a cockatoo, and seeing the personality in that, and actually more so a budgie. We have budgies in an aviary, but we also have one inside because he's elderly. It's retirement home, which is bizarre, I guess. But to see that personality that you don't see when they're in a bigger aviary, or if they're out in the wild, you don't see those personalities. But to really see and understand and get to know them, as an individual, it's a completely different experience. And of course, why wouldn't that be the same with sharks?
Totally, right?
Yeah.
It's just like we have, people really close in our lives, like, our family or our friends. And yeah, why is that any different with other life on the planet, like sharks? Exactly right.
Yeah, they're not some inanimate object.
Exactly. There's more to them than meets the eye.
Yes. So what is it about this mission that's so important to you? What is it that's really calling you right now with it?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this on with a story, Andrea, because there was one particular turning point in my life which really for me was the point where my love of sharks, which had developed over a series of years and swimming with them in different environments in different parts of the world, really turned into a need that I couldn't no longer be silent anymore, because I knew what was actually happening to sharks around the world. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to stand up. So let me go back and tell you the story. So, and this actually only happened 2 years ago. So I've probably spent about, 8 years going scuba diving with sharks in different parts of the world, right here in Australia, on our back door step, in places such as Fiji and South Africa with the great whites. And one of my big dream trips was to save up and to go to the Galapagos, these remote islands, about 500 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. And I'd saved up for years for this dream trip. I quit my job and I went to South America. And actually the number one thing I wanted to do there was to swim with hundreds of hammerhead sharks. And it's not everyone's dream trip, I know.
No, it's not my dream trip, I'll be honest. It's not something that I would ever contemplate. I don't even get in the water. My fear is water, not the sharks.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll work on that. But there was something, it's like there was this inner kind of sort of call, something was calling me to these hammerhead sharks. And I just knew I had to go and swim with them. And, hammerhead sharks are these like really crazy, like weird looking sharks, right? With their, these hammer looking heads. They have the eyes on the side of their heads. They're like really weird looking. But once again, because of my love for these weird and wonderful things, they just became my passion to go and see in the flesh. And so finally, the day had arrived where we got on this luxury boat and steamed out to the far islands in the Galapagos called Darwin and Wolf Islands. And the morning had arrived. And I was feeling so nervous and excited to really see them in person finally, after years of saving up for this trip. And I remember descending down with my buddy to 30 meters below the surface, and the current was a little strong, and we had to line up along this rock wall, and we had to cling on to the rock wall. And it felt like forever waiting for these sharks to come out. What felt like hours, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. My heart was pounding because I was also so nervous that finally something I'd wanted to do for so long was actually about to happen. And then finally, one hammerhead comes out, and then two, and then tens of them are just gliding, just only a couple of meters in front of me, almost like in this big, like, sort of this big, like, just school of, like, as if they were marching, like right in front of us, but like swimming. And they were just gliding. They were just the most beautiful things I think I'd ever seen at this time, and they still are. Every time I watch videos of this experience, just I can feel the energy in my heart just race, because they just make me so happy. And I was just in total awe. Like, I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you just feel with so much happiness and gratitude that it's just like this energy, like whiz just all throughout your body. That's exactly how I felt on this day. And I was just speechless coming up after that dive. It was just to see these prehistoric, to actually be in the water only meters away from these prehistoric creatures which had been around they've been around for over 450 million years, like even longer than the dinosaurs.
That's
To be
insane.
swimming with a creature,
Yeah.
it is, right? It's just incredible. And just knowing that alone and to see them was just magic. So it was actually one of the happiest days of my life, no joke. But this is where things went down, not downhill for me, but this is where I kind of realized the reality of what's actually happening to sharks around the world. Is that not long after returning home from this trip, I realized something that was about to, in one hand, devastate me, but on the other hand, be the turning point in my life to be doing what I'm doing today. And I remember I was really tired after a long day at work. And I remember just sitting in my bed, scrolling through my phone, looking at my emails, you know, as you sometimes do when you're about to wind down and go to bed, you get on your phone. And I came across something that actually just shocked me. And there on my screen was a beautiful hammerhead's face staring up at me, and it had a hook through its eye. And the headline was, up to 90% of hammerhead sharks had been fished from our Great Barrier Reef in only the last 50 years. And that was a total shock and contrast to me, because I had been swimming in the Galapagos Islands just months earlier. And I'd come back home to our home country in Australia, where often we think sometimes this stuff just doesn't happen here. Well, we had almost wiped out this species, and just in 50 years. And that's basically about the age of my parents, since they've been alive. And I thought, this is insane. And it was in that moment too that I realized that the plight of sharks around the world and the important role that they play for the health of our oceans and for all of us too. They regulate the entire oceans and the health of the entire oceans, and we were wiping them out at such an alarming rate. And it was in that moment that I knew that I had to stand up and do something, because I knew that it wasn't just the sharks that were at stake here. It was so much more than that. It's our coral reefs and it's our other fish, that if we take out sharks, whole food webs become out of balance, and drastic things can change and happen there. And that's when I knew I had to be a voice for sharks and share that message to people around the world.
Yeah, it shows that the importance of every species. And to think that I'm just that figure of 450 million years is just resonating through my head, that here is this creature, this animal that has survived everything to be one of the longest one of the longest lasting species on the planet. Is there one that's longer than that? I don't know. But then in 50 years to be devastated in their numbers like that, and really, if that continues, then they're threatened completely. How can we live with that kind of thought, that we're desecrating something that's just been around for so long? I just can't get my head around that. I guess I'm also kind of animal focused always have been. So I just can't comprehend that thought, and just to remind us that every species has their vital role in life, whether we like them or not. Even those snakes that we can't stand, that we're all afraid of, they're okay. They have their place.
Yep, exactly right. Yep.
So how are you going about making sure that we get this message, and what do you want us to do about it?
So the first thing, and if I wanted to take it back to an even broader bird's eye view too here, because I think there is many things that we can do in our daily lives, simple actions, and that is one thing that I'm going to get to in a moment. But the first thing I wanted to mention is that I think there's a much larger driving force here at play, and I think when I think about what are my motivations and what I really want people to do, the first thing is actually just to be in deep gratitude, and realize what a privilege it is that we share this planet with such amazing creatures. And I think that if all of us could be in that state, then we wouldn't want to be killing and destroying everything and chopping down our forests and polluting our rivers and whatever that is for people. It's, if it's, you're a lover of fungi, or you're a lover of rivers or forests, like whatever it is, that is at the heart, and mine just happens to be sharks. And so that would be the first thing that I would say, is to be curious and have a deep gratitude and find out more about these species that we share this planet with. And if I get back onto my mission about sharks, because I know not everyone is a lover of sharks like myself, but if you can at least take my word for it, is to how important sharks are for this planet, and we can't afford to lose them. We cannot afford to lose them. And we need to be doing everything that we can to protect them, because as I mentioned earlier, they are like the immune systems of our ocean, by keeping everything healthy and in balance. And so there are many things that are affecting sharks, and I guess one of the drivers about why we're losing them is because we're basically overfishing them at such an alarming rates, faster than what they can actually reproduce. And I should say that it's not all shark species, but it's about a quarter of shark species all around the planet. And so that begs the question for, okay, so what is influencing the fishing rates for sharks out there? And I should say as well, sharks are my thing, but it's not just sharks. It's many other fish and other marine life too, which are also endangered here, like
Absolutely.
dolphins and seabirds, who actually get caught through fishing practices that aren't done sustainably and responsibly. And so when you think about, okay, what is influencing what happens out there in the oceans? One of the things that I've become really passionate about is actually the seafood that we eat and we put on our plates. And when I've started to learn and to research more about what is actually the link between what seafood we put on our plates and what happens out there in the oceans, you'd be astounded. And so just to give you an example, is when fishing for tuna, thousands of sharks often get caught in the process, many of them obviously by accident too, and so many of them just get dumped overboard because they're not the target species, or some of them even get caught, or some of them have their fins chopped off and then are thrown back into the oceans. But really, when we think about, okay, well, if sharks have been impacted by catching tuna, that really comes down to the importance of actually knowing the species that we're eating and what is sustainable to eat and what is not, and what has been caught with minimal impact on our sharks and our oceans in general. And so really it comes down to, if we're a seafood lover, or even if we don't eat seafood ourselves, but we know people who do, we can actually be advocates and be really conscious about the decisions that we make as consumers about what seafood we decide to put on our plates. And there is a really simple tool that everyone can use, and it's the Good Fish Australian Sustainable Seafood Guide, which actually it's on any smartphone. You can download it on your phone from the App Store. And it's this really simple tool that actually enables you to, when you're at the fish market or you're at a restaurant, you can open up the app and you can actually do a search for different species of seafood and find out what is sustainable to eat and what is not. So I think this is a really important tool, because it tells us, there's so much information out there and sometimes it's hard to know, but it tells us exactly what is sustainable, what is not, maybe what to think twice about. And so that is one thing that we can all do in our daily lives, is to firstly just to be a bit more conscious about what we're eating, and using this the Good Fish Sustainable Seafood Guide as a tool to do that, to give us power as consumers. Because sometimes there's a lot of things that are happening, a lot of different work that's being done at the fisheries management level to really look at how these fisheries are managing and catching fish and try to improve that. But sometimes it's not always easy for us to get involved in things like that too. And so in our daily lives, we can take the power back as consumers and make positive decisions for our environment.
That's easy. That's easy. Just look at the app and go, okay, well, this is the fish I'm going to eat. This is the fish I'm not going to eat.
Yeah. Exactly.
Make it simple.
Because things out there are hard enough, right? Sometimes.
That's right, it is. I guess once you know which fishes, once you look at it a few times, you kind of get that in your mind of what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
But what kind of difference do you think that can make? I guess when consumers vote with their wallets, it does make a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And look, I think it's definitely not something that we can definitely change, overnight. Like all of a sudden we're going to be saving all the world sharks and things like that. But it's a gradual change, and really where it comes into is the power of community. And what's important, what's been an important journey for me to realize is that sometimes it can be really not an easy thing to sometimes think, okay, well, how is my one decision or one action actually going to make an impact in the world, right? There's so many people on this planet. How is one action going to make a difference? But the key here to really driving this change, to accelerate this change at a much greater level, is not just to be doing it ourselves, but to also be telling other people about doing it, and to really, the power in one can obviously inspire so many other people to also do it. And we really need to get as many people as possible across Australia or across the planet to be doing this type of thing, because then that's when we can really drive real change. But I think, for anyone that might be thinking, well, how is this one action going to impact anything? If we look at people such as Nelson Mandela, if they had that mentality, then we wouldn't have seen change, right? And so it really starts from one person, but with the intention to connect to a much bigger vision and a much bigger change that is possible when we really communicate with other people this change. And then that can really start to influence what we see out there in the oceans. And I guess it's like the same too with, even if you just look at products, for example, that are made with palm oil, like that's become a really big movement too, right? And you're starting to see, people and really like, and even, like veganism as an example, when something really starts to take hold in the community, it can really spread far and wide, and that's just getting bigger and bigger. And I think it's definitely the same with sustainable seafood, that it's just, studies have shown that many seafood lovers want it to come from sustainable sources. And so I think that is a big enough driver too, that majority of people want it to be sustainable too. And so that's really showing the signs of this shift starting to happen.
Yeah, and I see that your message, what I like about the way you present it is, okay, it'd be very easy to get onto the vegan bandwagon with this, which is nothing wrong with that. I'm quite open to veganism. However, it's like you have acknowledging that not everybody wants to go down that line for whatever reason, and saying to them, well, even if you don't give up your fish, there is a way of doing it that is sustainable for the planet, for the world. You don't have to give up your fish, but you have to look at it and be conscious about how you're eating and what you're choosing to do and eat in your life.
Exactly, Andrea. And that's something that I definitely, I'm not going to tell people what we should and shouldn't do, because that's not my place, and it's also not my style. Like what I am a fan of is just actually communicating to people about my own personal decisions. And so that's something that I use in my story that I share, is that when I actually shared that I made a decision to stop eating shark, or flake as it is commonly labelled as, because I began to learn about what was happening to sharks around the world, and seeing them swimming and building up relationships with sharks, I couldn't anymore. And so for me, I made a choice to stop eating it. And I communicate that decision to people such as my dad, who I never thought I would hear this from, but, you know, just from my sort of education and I guess my stance that I'd sort of made in my personal decisions, I'd found that I'd inspired other people to do that, to also stop eating shark or flake. And it definitely wasn't coming from a place of, you know, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, because I think we know that people don't respond to that.
No.
But also too, like, I'm definitely not on the mission of telling people that we shouldn't eat seafood, because seafood is such an important protein source for many of us, and many of us live near the coast, and it's part of our way of life too, as, you know, living in Australia, in a country surrounded by water, and for many other countries around the world. But it's really about knowing, okay, let's find out a little bit more about this species that we're eating. Like, where has it come from? Where has it been caught? You know, how many of these species are there left in the wild? You know, is it an endangered species? Have we still got plenty of them? You know, has it been caught by damaging, you know, coral reefs or the seafloor, or, you know, and just to be a bit more mindful. And I think if everyone was just a little bit mindful of how things were caught and where they come from, then that is the start to making a big change and a big impact.
Yes, and I think we can go across the board with that, about being more mindful about where all of our food is coming from, whether it's plant, animal, whatever it is, that we should be more mindful about where that's coming from, how it's sourced, and ensuring that we have the best practices are being undertaken.
Yep, and supporting those, you know, supporting those industries or companies or businesses that are doing the right thing, and they're making the effort to catch things sustainably, and that's such an important thing to do. Definitely, is particularly like looking to our future and to make sure that we've still got the species, you know, here in a few years' time.
So it's a wonderful story that you've been sharing with us, with a lot of a really strong message for us just to all think a little bit deeper and harder about what we're doing on the planet, and trying to have a sustainable planet so that we all have a place to live, that we don't let go of these things that are so precious.
Exactly.
So I'd like to really thank you for being on the podcast today. And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you or with what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Thanks so much for having me on the show. So much gratitude to be on here sharing this message, which a message from the sharks, I should say. And the best way for people to get in touch with me is I'm on Instagram as Shani_ocean. That's SHANNY_ocean. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I also wanted to repeat as well, in case anyone thinking I didn't grab the name of that app for me to look up sustainable seafood. It's actually not my app. It's actually an app developed by the Australian Marine Conservation Society, and it's called the Good Fish Sustainable Seafood Guide. And you can definitely find that and find out more information about the seafood that we eat at goodfish.org.au. But I also should mention that people can get in touch with me via my email too, which is s.hurley@live.com. And I'm really looking for any platform I can to be able to share this message far and wide and share my love story of sharks. So, you know, if it is obviously something that appeals to you or to anyone, or you want to hear more about the sharks and the sharks out there in the world, then I'd be definitely happy to receive, you know, anyone who would like to reach out and to share this story. To keep this story alive. Yeah.
And Shannon is a great speaker. I've heard her speak, and I'd highly recommend it. If you want to have a great speaker come to your event. So thank you again, Shannon. This has been a great time to be able to share with you. And thank you once again. We've come to the end of another podcast. So this has been Social Mission Revolution, and we'll be back next time with another Social Mission Revolutionist. This has been the Social Mission Revolution with Andrea Putting. Join me again next week when we'll speak to another social mission revolutionist who will inspire you on your journey to making your ultimate impact on the world.